All right, we're now live. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our August visa session. Today we have with us Mike Templeman, who's going to be talking about US visas, specifically student visas. So I'm going to hand it over to him. If any of you have questions during the session, if you're with us on Zoom, you have the Q&A box. And if you're on Facebook with us, please type them in the comments and we'll try to get them, try to get to them at the end of the session. So over to you, Mike. Thank you for joining us.
All right, thank you for having me. I am a consular officer here in the U.S. Consulate, Karachi, and we see a lot of student visas come through, a lot of applicants coming through with student visas, and we like to periodically hold these sessions to give you as a potential student visa holder the opportunity to hear about how student visas work, how they're issued, what the application process looks like, and what you need to do in order to prepare yourself to complete the application process if you're trying to go and study in the United States. So I'll go through some basics in this presentation. It's not going to necessarily answer every question that you might have. And at the end, we want to make sure that you get your questions answered. So we'll leave plenty of room for that. You can either, you can end up typing those in the chat box and we'll read them out and answer your questions. And then if you leave here today and you feel like you still didn't get your question answered, you can always send us an email to the US Consulate, or you can talk to our partners, Education USA Pakistan, who are an excellent source of information on student programs in the US. So if your questions pertain particularly to the types of schools, to what programs are available, all of those things, Education USA is a great resource. So they'll be a good place to go as well. So I'm going to go over the overall application process. We'll talk a little bit about any changes or overall kind of numbers, and then how you can follow up and get additional resources or help answering some questions that you might still have, okay? So let's go to the next slide. All right, so first of all, this is just real basic. In order to go to the United States as a student, who is a Pakistani passport holder, a Pakistani national, you would need a student visa to do that, okay? This visa is actually a B1, B2 visa, which is more typically used for, just an example, but this is more typically what's used for tourism. You'll be applying to most likely an F or a J visa, and we can talk about those categories and what they mean, but the type of program that you are applying to in the United States will determine what forms and type of visa that you will be applying to. But if you're issued a visa, it goes in your passport and you absolutely need that visa to be valid, have the correct dates and correct information for you in order to travel to the United States. So you have to do that step first. Okay. Let's go to the next slide, please. So here are the basic student visa classifications. And again, this will be driven by the type of program you're applying to. The vast majority of our students that we see in the US Consulate Karachi are F category students. So an F visa is for general programs like a bachelor's program. It could be a master's program. It could also be an English or foreign language program. Our J category visas are for exchange programs, and often those are students who are on a sponsored visa, either through maybe the Pakistani Education Foundation or through something like the Fulbright program. Fun fact about Pakistan, Pakistan is actually the #1 source of Fulbright scholars in the world. So we know there are many talented students out there, and many of the talented students who come to the United States come from Pakistan. And then M category visa are some other vocational programs or different types of coursework. And if you're applying to one of those programs, your program will tell you about the details about that. Next slide, please. Okay, so everything that I'm telling you today is basically the same that we do all over the world, regardless of which embassy or which consulate you're going to. The differences are really about the appointment systems that we utilize. So in this case, you know, the way that you might sign up for the appointment might look a little bit different, but otherwise, the way that we work is going to be the same worldwide. I came from China before I came to work in Pakistan, and I issued thousands and thousands of visas in China. And I can tell you that the way that we conduct interviews, the way we go through the basic process is exactly the same as it is here in Pakistan. In general, when you apply to your program's going to have a specific start date. That program start date is going to be listed on a document that you will be issued from the school, and that date will determine when you are actually eligible to be issued a visa, okay? And so generally for student visas, you can't apply to the program, or you can't apply to the visa more than 6 months. You can't be issued that visa more than 6 months out from the start date of your program, okay? And for the J1, the exception is J1, the J1 program that we were talking about. If you're a J visa student, those actually can be issued as soon as you get what is known as the DS 2019 form. These are the two forms that most students hold. They either have an I-20 for the F visas, or they have a DS 2019. And in both cases, those forms will come directly from the program office that you're working with. You'll bring those to the interview, and then the officer at the interview will inspect those documents and move your case forward accordingly. And it is also important to note that those forms that you're given will need to be carried with you in addition to the visa. So if you're an F visa holder, if you're traveling with an F visa in your passport, you'll also travel with this I-20 form in your carry-on luggage. You may be asked for it at the border. The same with the DS 2019, which a consular officer, if your visa is approved, will sign at the time of the interview. Next slide, please. Okay, so before you come in for the interview, you've got to schedule your interview appointment. You've got to complete the DS 160 form, and you are going to pay 2 fees. You're going to pay your application fee. That's for the visa fee. You're also going to pay what is known as a SEVIS fee. And there's a website for that. That fee is very important to pay ahead of time. Your visa cannot be moved forward unless you've paid your SEVIS fee ahead of time. So you'll go online, you can see it at fmjfee.com, make sure you've paid it, and then you can even print out a receipt from that and bring that with you to the interview as well. One important note is that in your passport, you'll have an expiration date. Your passport needs to have at least 6 months validity. It cannot expire less than 6 months from the date that your program starts. And by program start, in this case, I actually mean the time that you physically arrive in the United States. So if you have a passport that expires in September, October, but then your program doesn't start until the following August, you're going to need to get a new passport. You have to make sure that your passport has at least 6 months on it. Okay. Next slide, please. All right, so these are just the required documents for your interview. You could also bring additional documents, and we can talk about those as well. But you will need a passport. You will need a photo, and you will need a passport photo. It's very particular, the type of photo, and the instructions are on our consulate website for the requirements of the photo. For instance, it has to have a white background, and it has to be an exact size. If your photo needs to be retaken, it's not that big of a deal, but again, anything that has to change can just slow up your process and make it harder for us to facilitate the issuance of a visa. So it's easier if you just if you read that carefully and go to a vendor who can take a passport photo for a US passport. You'll need your DS-160 confirmation page. So the DS-160 is the application. And once you fill that out, you will get a confirmation page. You will print that confirmation page. It has a barcode, it has your picture, it has your basic information. You'll bring that confirmation page with you to the interview. And then, this is where I was describing those I-20s or DS 2019 forms. You will have that form that's been issued by the school. You'll bring that with you to the interview as well. And finally, receipts for your application and for your SEVIS fee. So these are the elements that are required in order for us to see you when you come at the consulate and for us to conduct an interview and look at your qualifications for the visa. Next slide, please. Okay, at the interview, we can ask a variety of questions. So you'll get to the interview window, someone will make sure you have the required documents, they'll make sure that your basic fees have been paid, you will get your fingerprints taken, and then we're going to, as consular officers, ask a variety of questions. They're not preset questions. They can change at any point. You may have friends who've interviewed and a consular officer asked them 3 or 4 questions. You may have a friend who went through who got asked 30 questions. There's no prescribed time for that interview. There's no prescribed specific questions that will definitely be asked. But the basics, as we are looking towards this visa and whether an applicant is qualified, include a little bit about you. Where are you coming from? What are you trying to do? And for students in particular, how are you going to fund this program? Studying in the United States, well, it is wonderful, and we have a wonderful range of programs, can also be incredibly expensive. And we are very aware of that. And it is a requirement that a consular officer be convinced that you have sufficient funds to pay for your program. You could, in fact, bring bank statements or other supporting documents with you. Please know that if you bring such documents, things like a home ownership, certificate or printouts of a bank account, an officer may or may not ask to see those documents. So that's just something to keep in mind. And finally, one of the things that we would be asking generally is what do you want to do with this degree? Why does this degree that you're going to seek or program that you're going into, if it's not a degree program, why does that program make sense for you at this particular time? So we may ask some questions around your selection process or what you intend to do with that degree. Okay, next slide. And at the end of the interview, you will find out one of basically 3 things. Either your visa will be approved, or your visa will be refused, and refused with a particular refusal law associated with it, or it could be refused 221G, which is administrative processing, meaning it cannot be issued until or unless you submit some additional information or documentation. So either you'll hear that your visa is approved and you'll be given that notification right there, or your visa will be refused under one of a number of potential US immigration laws, okay? The most common of these laws is 214B, and you can go online and you can look that up. These are public laws. I won't bore you with all of the details of what these refusal laws are, but ineligibilities could range from anything. If someone has committed a crime, it could be as simple as a person doesn't have the means to pay for a program. It could be that someone is believed to be an intending immigrant to the United States and might misuse a particular visa. All of these things are possible, and I just want to put out there the range of possibilities, okay? But you will be notified at the time of the interview. Next slide, please. Okay, I mentioned 221G for further processing because this is a very common refusal type. So this just means that your case cannot be issued at the time of the interview. It is considered a refusal, but it is a refusal that can be re-reviewed. So it will be reviewed under the circumstance of further documents that need to be submitted or further information that needs to be submitted. If you are refused 221G, it is not the end of the world. It is not the end of the process. What it just means is we are going to follow up with you and ask you for that additional information. It is up to you as an applicant to supply that information. So we will reach out to, we will tell you at the time of the interview, and then we will furthermore reach out to you again and give you specific instructions on what required information we need in order to bring your case to a final decision of approve or refuse. Okay, next slide. Okay, there are a lot of things that people think about visas that may or may not be true. There are a lot of myths out there. A lot of people think, for instance, that there are correct or incorrect answers in visa interviews. This is simply not true. Every person, every situation is looked at individually. And so if an officer asks a particular question, what's most important is that you tell the officer the truth about that situation. They are assessing a variety of factors. They are assessing many different things about an individual applicant and the type of visa that's being applied to. And one of the most important things is that an applicant tells the truth. So even if you think that you could give a better answer, you know, for instance, sometimes people try to exaggerate their salaries. Sometimes people try to exaggerate the type of work that they do, or maybe you know, not want to tell us about a particular relative or family member. Those things are things someone should consider before they come into an interview, because the consular officer is looking for the truth. And that's a really important thing, but there is no right or wrong answer to a particular question. A lot of people, you know, think that you need to go to a particular type of university or program. You actually can get a visa to attend any type of university or program in the US that is approved to admit international students. So the schools in the US have their own process under which they are approved programs under either F or J or M programs, and that school's approval will determine whether the school is a program that you as an international student can apply to. And those schools could be very, very small schools or very, very large schools. One thing we note in particular in Pakistan is that a lot of people seem to think that if they go to a fixer or a visa consultant, that they will be able to make a better application. In our experience, adjudicating thousands and thousands of visas, we do not believe this is true. There is no evidence to support that. They do not have any ability to persuade us or make your application look in a way better so that we would approve it. Again, the most important thing for us as adjudicators and as consular officers is that we are getting true information about the applicant. So that's just something to think about. Visa fixers make money off of telling you that they're going to help you get a visa. In reality, they make money off of telling you that they can help you get a visa. And there is no evidence that going to a visa fixer is more likely to get you a visa. Just something to keep in mind. And finally, I just want to emphasize that it is really, really true that the United States really does welcome students from all over the world. We encourage students from all over the world. As I indicated earlier in the presentation, Pakistan is the #1 source of our most prestigious international exchange program, the Fulbright program. And we recognize that there are many, many talented students here. And most of our schools in the United States are equipped to accept international students. Certainly the ones that are approved to accept international students are very excited to have you come. So every year we see thousands and thousands of students coming to the US. Next slide, please. All right, conditions under COVID. One thing, we don't need to belabor any of these points right now. We don't need to talk about older presidential proclamations, but I will say one thing we've noted under COVID conditions right now. Some programs have done online study before you come to the US. That's perfectly fine. You'll want to tell the consular officer if you've started a program online and now you're applying to go in person. One thing also to keep in mind is appointments for visas can be difficult to obtain. And so, making sure you're applying and getting your paperwork in order early is important. We've had people show up and their program is starting just within 1 or 2 days or within the same week as their interview. That's not realistic in terms of receipt of a visa. It usually takes about a week after an interview in order for your visa to actually be issued and printed into and put into your placed into your passport book. And if your case is 221G for further processing, it may take even longer than that. So it is particularly important for you as an applicant to apply to schools earlier, get your materials in order, and consider when the start date of the program is versus when you are applying for the visa. Okay, next slide, please. All right, I'm going to leave these resources up here for just a second, so you could take these down. But these are places where you can go to learn more information about coming to the United States and about traveling to the United States. First of all, our travel.state.gov website will have information updated all of the time. So, during COVID, for instance, there have been rule changes over the last year about when it was okay to travel to the United States and under what conditions, and if people from certain countries require different types of documentation, if COVID tests are necessary. All of that type of information can be found on travel.state.gov. Education USA, this is our local partner here in Pakistan. They have offices here in Pakistan. We have representatives actually on this Zoom call as well and presentation tonight. They are just an excellent, excellent resource and can provide all sorts of information on the different types of schools and programs available for international students. For exchange scholars, j1visa.state.gov is a good resource to look at. And then if you're for your DS-160s and for information about the actual application itself, seac.state.gov. And then finally, the Department of State issues your visa. This is done this is part of the US government process. One of the number one most important things that US consulates are doing in the issuance of visas, in helping people travel to the United States, is also protecting national security interests. So actually, even as a student to the United States, you are being vetted and looked at from a security perspective, and the Department of Homeland Security is a partner in the process of this visa issuance process as well. So the Department of State issues visas, but Department of Homeland Security has information on traveling to the United States, and in particular studying in the United States, and how you maintain your correct status as a student in the United States. So next slide. I think. Okay, we also have here our information on the appointment schedule. So that's important. And then our general website. So our consulate website's always going to have the best local information, the best information on how you can apply for a visa and those particular details about what the visa process looks like here that may be a little bit different than just the general process. And finally, I'll say, some of you are already doing this, but you can follow us on social media, on Facebook and Twitter. And sometimes when there's updates or changes or information or things like sessions like this, like tonight's session was a general session on student visas, but we also might host sessions for particular categories of visa applicants or other types of interests going on. And a lot of times that information is found on Facebook and Twitter. So check those out as well. Thank you so much for listening, for coming, for taking in this information, and for your desire to study in the United States. So I will just leave it at that. We've gone about 30 minutes, and now we will open it up for questions that you might have about this process. Do we have any questions?
Thank you, Mike, for the presentation. So we've gotten a few questions. I'll ask them so it's just easier for everyone to follow.
Sure.
And everybody else, like we're here for some time. So please, if you have more questions, just send them in right now.
Okay.
So we get a lot of questions about like rejections for 214B. So
yes.
I wanted to ask on behalf of all those people is what should a student do if they get rejected on 214B? Should they apply again, or what would you advise them?
That is a great question. And we get that question a lot. Even at the time of the interview, we get that question a lot. Obviously, when you apply to a visa, your hope is that you are going to be approved for that visa. 214B is by far our most common visa refusal. Under US immigration law, it is presumed, it may be, in your mind, it may not be fair, or it may, people may have personal opinions about what this means, but 214B essentially legally says that the consular officer is to assume that any applicant for a visa is an intending immigrant to the United States unless or until they demonstrate to the satisfaction of the officer that they are not an intending immigrant to the United States. There are some other facets to 214B as well. It is a long law under the Immigration and Naturalization Act, and I won't get into all of the details. It is public information. This is available. You can read about it on the internet, but the officer will not spend, I will note, the officer will not spend a lot of time explaining the details behind your interview. So when, we often get done with an interview and someone is refused 214B, and what they really want to know is, what specific question is it that caused me to get this 214B? And the honest answer is, generally, it's not one specific question. It is a variety of circumstances. Some things may be completely outside of your control, and that is just part of the US legal process. This is not a moral judgment about you as an individual. This is simply a consular officer making a determination that under US law, you're not qualified for that visa that day. Now, to answer the second part of that question of whether someone should apply again, I think that, again, is a very personal question. I will note that it is fairly expensive to apply for a visa. And often what we see sometimes is applicants will apply again and again, and they're not necessarily bringing any new or different information to that interview, and maybe just as likely to receive a 214B decision again. I cannot tell an applicant not to reapply. Sometimes people do reapply, and they are able to present new or different information, and they may be found to qualify. So unfortunately, I know this may be the question. This may be the question that is asked most often, and for which I think often our applicants feel like they don't get a satisfactory answer. But the basic answer is, at the time of that interview, based on all of the information available to the consular officer, including information that the applicant is unable to see, it is determined that the applicant does not qualify for that particular visa. It doesn't mean they won't ever qualify for a visa, or that they might not qualify for a different type of visa in the future, but on that day for that interview, they did not qualify. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. I think that must have answered a lot of people's queries. So we have a couple of more questions coming in. One of them is that if someone is applying for an F1 student visa, can they take their dependents with them? If they are approved, what would the procedure be for the dependents?
Yes, absolutely. So when they apply for a visa, everyone fills out a DS 160, including dependents. So if you're applying for an F1, for instance, your dependents will be applying for an F2. So this would be the immediate spouse or minor children of the applicant. Adults can't take their adult brothers or sisters or aunts and uncles. on student visas, but immediate dependents in the immediate family as defined by US immigration law. So it could be a spouse or a minor child. And they will also come and do an interview. Sometimes that application will take place all at the same time with all of the F1 and the F2s present at the same interview. Sometimes we see what's known as follow to join, where someone will apply after the F1 has already started. Both are perfectly valid. If you have dependents who are intending to go as well, some of the same issues apply, making sure that the applicants are qualified for the visa, making sure that the relationship is credible and documented. So in that case, you might need family documents like a family registration, marriage certificate, birth certificates, those types of documentation. And again, they will also have a SEVIS number. They will also have an I-20 or a DS-2019 if they're a J2. So again, absolutely, dependents can be part of the application process, and in many cases are part of the process.
All right, thank you. We have questions about having siblings in the US, like if your brother or any other sibling is already studying in the US, does that impact your application? And I'm going to add another part to it while you're answering this is if you have someone sponsoring your education from the US, would that have an impact on the application, the visa application? I mean.
So we see applicants who are approved. We see applicants who are refused who have relatives or family in the US. That question is merely, it's often asked, and I think sometimes people are worried like, oh, but if I have an aunt or an uncle who lives in the US, or oh, if I have a sibling who's already studying in the US, is that a problem? That is not a problem. That is just part of the information gathering process that a consular officer will be conducting during the course of the interview. So it is absolutely, again, in the applicant's best interest to tell the truth when it comes to their particular family circumstances. We have many Pakistani Americans who reside in the United States, and we have many family members who come and visit. We have many times seen aunts or uncles or immediate family who are in the US who will be sponsoring someone for a student visa application. We just want to know the details of that situation, and so we will ask sometimes questions about that. And again, it's most important that you tell the truth about that situation, not that there's any particular right or wrong configuration, because we see all the different combinations of that situation. And we absolutely know that the US is home to many family and friends of Pakistanis who are applying for visas.
All right, Mike, we have a few more questions about the timeline for visas, especially right now. Some people are asking if about how long it will take to get a visa. I'm assuming a student visa is their concern, and like how much time would it take to get an appointment for an interview, and again to be accepted, if there is a general timeline that is being followed?
Yeah, I would have to actually look to see, and you'd have to go online. I have not done that myself today to see what the appointment system is revealing in terms of when interviews are available. New appointments come online all of the time. As they open up, we're putting them online. But generally, students are starting months ahead of time when it comes to student programs. They're doing that for several reasons. One, you have to apply to the school. So when the school opens its application process, that's when a lot of students get started. Their search process, that can take sometimes weeks or months to establish and get into a program, even before the interview starts. Once someone secures an appointment, once someone comes into interview, it is often the case that a visa is ready within 4 or 5 days from the time of that interview. But I note that doesn't mean you should be applying 4 or 5 days before you want to travel to the United States. I think one of the issues that we see often is someone will attempt to do their visa interview right before they want to go to the US, right before their program starts, and their visa may require additional time for processing, in which case they may not actually make it on time to their program. And in some cases, there is very little that we can do about that. So, we are very good at turning around a visa when it is fully issuable. But there sometimes are things that are required of visas that we might not know about, which might make a visa issuance take a little bit longer. So it's definitely worth your while to plan ahead, go on the website, check out the schedule, start to think about this ahead of time. I think most applicants, when they're thinking about studying in the US, it really is sort of a year-long process for them, from the time that they start looking at the schools, to the time they start applying, to the time they actually get the appointment, get the interview, get the visa issued. Sometimes that can take the better part of a full calendar year. So it's not too early. If you guys are on this call and you're thinking about studying next year in the United States, that's great. That's great. You've got plenty of time, and you can begin to line up these pieces so that you're not rushing at the end.
Would you say the same for someone applying for the spring semester as well? This would be a good time if they've gotten their acceptance.
Yeah, absolutely. If you've got your acceptance and you're looking at school in the spring, this is great. This is great to get on there. And if you've got your acceptance and you've got your forms, I think it's good. It's good to start looking at when the interview timing will make sense. Yep.
All right. There are also a few questions about bank statements and like proving finances. So
Sure.
one of the questions is about how old the bank statement should be. I'm assuming they mean how long has it been that the funds have been in the bank account that they're showing you. And the other question related to that is there any other way to show the availability of finances besides your own or your parents' bank statement?
I think that bank statements is something we get a fair number of questions about, and I think sometimes people are surprised because they'll print out all the bank statements, and then sometimes a consular officer asks for them, and sometimes they don't ask for them. There's a lot of information that can help determine whether someone has the ability to pay for a program, and it's not just bank statements. One of the reasons why people are asking about sponsors and what kind of work those sponsors are doing. Are there other students in the family also going to school? How much does your program cost? Some programs, a program that costs $20,000 is different than a program that costs $1 lakh, dollars. Like, it's just worth thinking about in kind of a more holistic way, if that makes sense. And so I don't want to go too far down into the details of, you know, analyzing someone's bank statements when it might not even come to that for an interview. But certainly, if you are qualified student and you have the ability to pay, you know, we understand that funds may have been moved into an account to help pay for that. And you know, if you do have someone, you know, if you've moved funds into an account, you may get further questions. You know, when did the money get there? How did it get there? You know, you may get a number of questions that come up. And yes, you know, a bank statement where there are regular deposits made and it's clear they're coming from an employer, that might look different than one big deposit that was made one time with a large sum of money. You know, I'm not saying one is right or one is wrong, but it may be things that get asked about during the course of an interview. And again, the most important thing for us as consular officers is to find the truth of the matter, not necessarily that there is a particular right or wrong answer as we ask our questions.
Right, so like just for everybody, it will really depend on your case. There's no hard or fast rule about it. Mike, there's
Absolutely.
also a question regarding standardized testing. Do your GRE or GMAT scores have any impact on your application?
Well, certainly your GRE or GMAT scores are going to be their requirements of certain graduate programs. The GRE is sort of a general graduate records exam for lots of different programs. The GMAT is a test for individuals going into generally Masters of Business Administration. And in either case, you know, a favorable score on that exam could be one way that someone could demonstrate that they are a credible student and, you know, intend to study in that program. But, you know, we're not, you know, necessarily going through a student's grades. You know, sometimes we might ask them to, you know, we might say, hey, can I see your mark sheets? Can I see, you know, what did you score when you did your A levels or O levels or these sorts of things? But there isn't a particular score on an exam that we're looking at that will determine whether or not you qualify for a US visa.
All right. We have a question regarding immigration. I'll read out the question exactly. If someone has applied for F4 immigration visa, but there is still approximately a 12-year wait for it, can they still apply for an F1 student visa? I'm not familiar with the terminology. Yeah.
Yes, so an F4 student visa is a family visa that is an immigrant visa. That is not to be confused with the F1, F2 visas that we are talking about. We're talking as student visas, these are all non-immigrant visas, but the US has a category of immigrant visa that is F4. And in Pakistan and in many places in the world, there is a very long, the limits on those visa issuances and the numbers that can be issued in different countries are actually determined by US Congress. So it is not up to a consular officer, it's not up to the embassy or consulate to determine when those visas are able to be issued. And so sometimes you have people waiting a very, very long time. They have a relative or family member in the US who has applied for them for an immigrant visa years and years ago. And now they may be looking to go to the US for either a visit or for a student purpose, both of which are on a non-immigrant basis. You are absolutely okay to apply for a visit visa or a student visa if you have a pending immigrant visa. I will note that in the case that you do have this, again, it's important that when a consular officer asks you about the details of that immigrant visa, you tell them what you know and what you understand about that visa. And so they need to receive truthful information from you about your understanding of that visa. There is not a right answer or wrong answer. There are people who do apply for visit visas while they have another type of visa pending. So that's just something to note.
Oh, okay. We have a question regarding documents. Whether the degree certificates and the transcripts that you bring to your visa interview, do they have to be attested? Are there any rules regarding that?
No, there are no rules like that. We're not asking people to go out and get documents notarized and endorsed and these sorts of things. You know, in general, bringing original documents to an interview is better than bringing copies. So if you have the original document, those are better to bring. There's no hard and fast rule. And again, this is the sort of thing where, you know, we encourage people to prepare and have those documents ready. That doesn't necessarily mean that a consular officer will ask for or need to see them in order to complete the interview.
Okay, I think that's all from the questions we've gotten. The rest of the questions are repetitive, so I would advise everybody that this video is going to be on our Facebook page after we end the session. So you can re-watch parts of it. And for those whose questions weren't answered, we've gone over most of the details. You can also reach out to us at Education USA Pakistan for more student-related questions that you have. And I would like to thank Mike for joining us today. Thank you so much for the presentation. This is also our last visa session for now. We have a bunch of other visa session videos on our Facebook page as well, which can be a great resource for everybody here. So all of this will be recorded and saved for future reference for anybody. So once again, thank you, Mike, and thank you everybody for joining us today.
Thank you guys all for attending. I appreciate it.
All right. Bye.
Bye.